Hey guys, welcome back to The Base Breeze, and happy Thanksgiving. This week we're dissecting the Colorado shooting at a gay club, the Iranian men's soccer team joining in on the women's protest movement at the World Cup, Trump is back on Twitter, kind of, and our very online roundup for the week. Let's go. Hey Brad, happy early Thanksgiving. I know you are pumped because you love Thanksgiving and I do not, so hope you're getting geared up.
Yes, we had this debate and I heard your very wrong opinion about Thanksgiving food already, but I'm very excited for one, to eat some pie and some mashed potatoes and some stuffing and some cranberry sauce and gravy. Oh, I love Thanksgiving. I'm a big fan of the food. I've got family visiting. My mom and my sister are in town this week. And also, the world, as we're going to talk about actually, the World Cup is off to a start this week, so I've been watching a ton of that. The USA did well in their opening match. They tied 1-1 against Wales, which is a pretty good team. They were really good in the first half and then not very good in the second half, but that puts them in an okay place for the rest of the tournament. It was so hilarious. You texted me the other day. You were like, so if Iran loses, does that mean they're out of the World Cup? Because, no, it's a group stage. It's not a single elimination tournament. But I do find it funny how during the World Cup, all of a sudden, non-soccer people start to pay attention to soccer.
Well, and even then I usually don't. I am solely paying attention because of what we're going to talk about later in the show. But it is kind of funny, for the first time I actually am a bit interested. But I am looking forward to Thanksgiving. I want to be clear. My family stands in solidarity with me against turkey. So we don't do that mess at all. We do prime rib. We do hams. We love a big charcuterie throughout the day. I also just discovered very recently that Kraft macaroni and cheese, which is my favorite Kraft macaroni. It's the best macaroni and cheese there is, okay? Kraft macaroni, the box, it's amazing. But I have not been able to have it in a decade. They came out with a gluten-free version. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm excited to see my niece. She's getting a little bit bigger. I saw her when she was born, and then I keep trying to go down to Tuscaloosa to visit her again, and she stays sick. Kids in daycare, I didn't know this because I didn't go to daycare, but she's had COVID, she's had RSV, she's had a bunch of stuff. So I'm excited to finally get to hang out with her again. So I am looking forward to it. I'm going to be going back to South Carolina, and I think it'll be a pretty good time. But with all that said, it is a heavy week this week. It's Thanksgiving. It's our first holiday, Brad, being self-employed. And it's kind of interesting because I'm I usually be bye, peace out from work. And I'm I don't really want to take off that much. So I'll probably not work Thanksgiving Day. But as a whole, there's a lot going on this week. The news is actually popping off, even though it's a holiday. So we've got a lot to discuss. And at the top of the hour, we have to talk about what happened in Colorado over the weekend. We had a really tragic event, and you've written a few incredible pieces about it. So I know you're going to guide us through kind of the major discussion points.
Yeah, so it's another one of those really kind of heartbreaking times where we're kind of left reeling from another mass shooting, another killing. This was at a Colorado Springs gay bar over the weekend. It left 5 dead, at least 25 injured. We're still kind of figuring out what happened, what the details are. But I was bothered first by this tragedy, though it actually, we should also mention how heroic some of the patrons, some of the gay men there, they actually took down the shooter by charging him. And so it could have been a lot worse. Some people pointed out online that these random gay guys stopped a mass shooting more effectively than the Uvalde police. And that is grim, but true. And so it's really sad. I've been trying to amplify stories about the victims. But I've also been pretty bothered because there's been this really, I think, grotesque politicization of the Colorado Springs shooting already. Just in the first couple days since it happened, almost immediately, it felt like they barely let the bodies get cold before they were using it, making tons of assumptions about it, and then using it to attack their political enemies. And mostly this time, it was the left politicizing a tragedy, but we know everybody does that. I don't know, did you see that same kind of thing unfold online over the weekend?
I did. And in fact, I was with Logan when the news broke, and he showed it to me, and he was kind of here we go. And within an hour of the news breaking, we knew nothing about the shooting whatsoever. You were seeing these kinds of tweets start pouring in, blaming Republicans for this, blaming, people who question whether or not trans people should play sports and equating that with creating violence, and even people who push back on what has often been, kind of a grotesque movement within the LGBTQ circles of trying to like bring these things to kids too early and talking about sexuality too early. People saying that people who criticize that and people who talk about not grooming children led to this kind of violence, which I just thought was really icky and gross and missed the mark entirely.
Yeah, so we have some examples here of things that were posted by pretty prominent folks in the aftermath. So AOC tweeted, after Trump elevated anti-immigrant and anti-Latino rhetoric, we had the deadliest anti-Latino shooting in modern history. And now, after an anti-LGBTQ campaign, Colorado Springs. Connect the dots, GOP. Similarly, a Democratic member of Congress, Ruben Gallego, tweeted, for the last 2 years, Republicans targeted the trans and in general the LGBT community by calling them groomers. Those words were weaponized into violence in Colorado Springs. Don't offer prayers if you ever said groomer. Offer an apology for being part of the problem. Similarly, David Hogg, a progressive and anti-gun activist, he said, Republican politicians and Tucker Carlson, Democrats are using drag queens and gay people to groom your kids. Mass shootings happens at a gay nightclub. Republican politicians and Tucker Carlson, who could have seen this coming? Now, I have two big problems with this. But one, they're all assuming that this was a hate crime, that this man specifically went there to target and kill gay people. We can't actually make that assumption. That could well be the case, but we do not know that yet. And there's a lot of things that can happen. Sometimes mass shootings are random acts of violence, or they're driven by motivations that sane people can't understand. So, for example, everybody remembers the really tragic 2016 mass shooting at the gay nightclub Pulse. And it was widely assumed to be an anti-gay hate crime. People still talk about it all the time as an anti-gay hate crime. All the coverage said that it actually wasn't. We later learned that the shooter was actually motivated by U.S. bombings of the Middle East. It was a Muslim shooter. And the FBI investigation, according to the Washington Post, found no evidence that he targeted gay people. It's not even clear if he knew it was a gay club when he started attacking it, though he learned that. So it's gross to me to see people leaping and making assumptions and not even waiting for facts before we think about how to respond to a tragedy like this.
I agree with you, and I thought this was really interesting. You wrote a piece about this, and I was reading it, and I didn't even know this, but the other shooting that happened at a gay club a few years ago in Florida, you made the point that actually that didn't end up being correlated to, like, gay hate at all. In fact, the guy was motivated by very different things that had pertained with, like, our policy in the Middle East, I believe, and it shocked me, because I never heard any clarification on that. That was the narrative. They ran with it to this, literally till I read your piece. That was my perception that had been a gay hate crime, right? And it is just a testament to how problematic it is when we rush to blame things. It literally can lead to wars. I mean, we saw this during 9/11. We rush to blame the wrong things, and instead, like, we get in all these, worse outcomes, and we don't ever even address the real root cause of the problem, which is a big thing for me in all policy. So I think that it's not only, like, gross to politicize a tragedy like this, and gross to, like, try to weaponize it and use it against your political opponents and even blame them for it, but it also is really highly problematic, because it is something that it prohibits us from actually addressing the root cause of the problem, actually preventing violence in this scenario, which should be the real focal point. And it's honestly exhausting. I think it desensitizes people to these tragedies. I think it makes it to where people, when they hear something happens, initially their reaction is just to dig in their heels, right? And just go ahead and get in their political camp. And I don't know, the whole thing is very depressing to me as a country, that this is how we respond to violence and to tragedies. And, even after 9/11, at the very least, you saw people, for the most part, coming together and working across the aisle and, like, recognizing, like, we're all Americans and we don't want these kinds of things to happen, right? I don't care. And I want to be clear, I can't stand a lot of the culture war stuff around trans rights. I can't stand a lot of the, like, I think the GOP definitely takes it too far in the culture war on this issue. And, like, I find it highly exhausting and at times, like, very bigoted. But to then come in and say that any of these people, Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene, take the wackiest person on the right you can find, wanted somebody to end up dead, wanted hate crimes to be carried out against gay people is completely false. There is no evidence of that. And I think it's just a disgusting impulse as a whole. And you know, the right does it to the left as well. But I'm really fed up with this as a whole.
Yeah, I find even if this was an act of anti-gay hatred, which we don't know yet, but it may well prove to be the case, who knows, it's still, I think, unreasonable and also insulting to turn this tragedy into like a partisan blame game. You really cannot tie a direct line from comments made by an individual or a media personality to an act of violence. I mean, are we really supposed to believe that if a few Republicans in Congress hadn't tweeted things about trans groomers or whatever, that this wouldn't have occurred? Is there even any evidence that this person saw those tweets or used Twitter? What about, like, they keep saying all this media coverage. I mean, we have no evidence that this shooter ever watched Tucker Carlson. I mean, like, a small percentage of America does. So I just think you just can't. It's like a deeply unfair accusation to throw at people because, and look, I've criticized a lot of these people for the way they talk about LGBT issues. The groomer thing, I think, is overused. And there are some concerns about how some of this stuff is being presented to kids. Like, I've seen videos of these like drag queen events that are family friendly, but have somebody twerking and like stuffing dollar bills in a bra of a drag. It's like, I think that's really weird and bad. But they do throw around this groomer thing. I think there's a conversation to be had there, but nobody wants there to be violence like this. And also, it's a really unfair accusation because it's so nebulous and it's impossible to disprove. They can say your words contributed to violence. Like, even though these people don't condone violence, how can they disprove this accusation against them? It's just tarring them with blood on their hands and all this. I think it's messed up, and it's also insulting to the victims because the shooter had agency. He chose to commit this atrocity. And when you start saying other people have blood on their hands for their political opinions or their speech or their words, you're actually taking away the blame from the shooter, making it sound like he was some sort of brainwashed, helpless actor without agency here who didn't choose to do this. You're making it so that 100% of the blame isn't being placed on the evil man who committed this act, and instead you're kind of removing some of that blame from them to throw it at your political opponents. And I think that's grotesque, and I think it's insulting to the victims of this atrocity in Colorado Springs.
Yeah, and I think it's just an outgrowth of a collectivist mindset, right? When you lose that understanding of individualism and autonomy and agency, I think you ultimately start to see things in this light. And it's false. It's absolutely wrong, right? People are absolutely responsible for what they do in life. And there's a lot of people in this country that want to ignore that fact on a myriad of fronts. And this is an outgrowth of that, right? You see that same mindset that they then apply to these kinds of issues. And you're right. It is the individual's fault. I don't care. I could sit there and listen to, hateful language about gay people all day long. And trust me, I kind of did growing up in like the Deep South and Southern Baptist circles, and still have agency and still say with my own moral compass, this is wrong. I reject it wholeheartedly. It violates my morals. It violates my conscience. And it would not make me turn against gay people, right? Like, there is responsibility here that everybody has. And I'm tired of that sort of getting washed away when we talk about these things.
Yeah, it also, it distracts from like real solutions. So for example, we'll get into this in a little bit, but like this shooter apparently threatened his mother and issued a bomb threat a year ago, and the police were involved. He had a standoff with the police. There was this law enforcement. He was on their radar as a dangerous person, and they didn't stop this. They didn't prevent this. So it's like we should probably be focusing on things like that and trying to figure out what went wrong instead of this partisan blame game. And of course, gun control. Of course, any shooting, they immediately go and some people on the left, not everyone on the left does this, but some very prominent voices do, and they make it a gun control issue. So the aforementioned David Hogg tweeted on the morning when he woke up to the tragedy, nothing about the victims, nothing about condolences first. He just tweets, ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Actually, funny thing, high-capacity magazines already banned in Colorado. Eric Swalwell, a Democratic congressman, tweeted, if you prioritize access to weapons of war over the lives of the LGBTQ plus community and over any victim of gun violence, you are not pro-life. I don't know about you, Hannah, but these like piling on dead bodies to push your anti-gun agenda regardless of the facts, it's always pretty gross to me. It always really gets under my skin.
Yeah, before I address that, I want to go back to what you said a minute ago, because I thought it was actually the key point here, which is that if we're going to blame anybody besides the individual for these acts, it should be systemic failures to prevent them. And it should be holding things like police and the Justice Department, the FBI, who often have these guys on their radar and are doing nothing to actually prevent crimes, even when they have laws at their disposal that could potentially help them do so. That's where we need to be focusing. And I think that never gets brought up in these conversations. I love that you mentioned it. But yeah, the gun control thing, that's where I thought this would go. I actually kind of thought this particular case, it really kind of took like a side road and went down this whole blaming the GOP about anti-gay hate angle first, and then they came back around to gun control, but you knew it would inevitably get there. And again, I think it's never the answer, right? I actually responded to Eric Swalwell's tweet, and I was like, actually, if you are working to prevent people or make it harder for people to defend themselves, especially people who are more likely to be victims of violence, then you are contributing to violence against them, right? That's the only kind of angle right that you can blame somebody's politics or policies, because when you disarm people, you disarm innocent, law-abiding people, you do make them sitting ducks, and you do contribute to making them victims at that point. So I can't stand this. Obviously, as you pointed out in another piece, Colorado has very strict gun laws. I think they get a B+, you said, from one of the groups that rank states for how strict their gun laws are. They're actually pretty strict, and it still didn't prevent this. And even the red flag laws people love to, try to push across various states, which you and I have spoken out pretty strongly against, did not prevent this, could not prevent this, because the problem is a failure of the legal system that I don't think is ever capable of getting there in time, right? If you ever have to call the cops, you're going to find out real fast why you need a gun, because they're going to take a good 15 minutes to get to you. And if you're actually in danger, it's going to be too late. You have to be able to rise up and defend yourself. And I love seeing that members of this club did just that, right? Like, they actually took action, defended themselves. They could have done so even more expediently if they'd had guns, which I'm sure this club barred, because any place that serves alcohol almost across the U.S. has banned guns. So it's just interesting to see, the complete inability to reckon with the failures that reckon with the failures of the policies that the left continues to push and even has in place. A lot of mass shootings have happened in California. A lot of mass shootings have happened in New York. They virtually have, complete gun control in those states, and they never grapple with the fact that they don't do anything to actually prevent those kinds of crimes. So I'm fed up with this discussion. I'm rabid on the Second Amendment, and this is one of the reasons why. And actually, another reason I'm rabid on the Second Amendment comes to fighting oppressive, totalitarian, disgusting governments. And when you disarm people, it makes it a lot harder to do, which we are seeing in Iran right now. So I want to turn our attention to soccer, as I mentioned at the top of the show.
Yes.
Brad has never heard those words come out of my mouth before. But something went down at the World Cup over the weekend that was really interesting and got my attention, because I have been following the Iranian protests for women's rights very closely. I've written about it a lot at Based. If you haven't read up, I encourage you to do so. So on Monday, the Iranian men's soccer team was playing England in a match at the World Cup, which is being held in Qatar. And the stadium started playing the country's national anthem. And when they did so, a protest broke out both in the stadium and on the field. The men's soccer team actually refused to sing the anthem in tandem. This was caught on video, and at the same time you saw a lot of attendees in the stadium, which include women, and that's interesting because women are banned from going to these kinds of events in Iran, but a lot of them have traveled to Qatar, I believe you call it Qatar actually, to attend this event. And you saw a lot of people in the stands booing the song. They were holding signs of protest against their country, some that read things like women, life, freedom. Others had reportedly tried to get into the game wearing the Persian flag instead of the Iranian flag, and because Qatar is also a very oppressive country, and I think in cahoots with Iran, they didn't let them in, but still, I thought that was great. And so it was actually this really public stand in favor of the protests in Iran. And this is, it's a big deal because I think, it's on this world stage. A lot of people have not been following what's happening there as closely as I have been. And in doing so, these people are taking great personal risks because they still have to live in this country. And this is a brutal, inhumane, awful, awful government. So I was very overwhelmed seeing this on Twitter. I literally spent most of yesterday morning crying over this because it was just so powerful. And there's always something for me about seeing people rise up and form movements together to overthrow injustice that is just so powerful. I love seeing these men these Muslim men, right, who are standing up for women's rights and standing up against what's happening in their country. And I do want to note a few things. So one, I love that Yashar Ali, who's a journalist here in the States, he responded to some of these videos of protests at the stadium. He said, it's not our national anthem. It's the national anthem of the Islamic Republic, which is an occupying force in Iran. And so oftentimes in our country, I feel like when we talk about Iran or Iraq or Saudi Arabia, there's this like urge to like conflate the people who live in these states with the governments and to say that they're, supportive of their governments. They asked for this. They want this. That is absolutely not the case. These are really oppressive regimes that are very difficult to overturn. And again, the people have been disarmed. But I think it's really important that we learn to do that, right? Start separating the people of these countries from their governments. And this, I think, really was something that helped a lot of Americans hopefully do that. I also want to note that this did seem to be a pre-planned protest as far as the actual soccer players go. The team's captain, and I really hope I don't butcher his name, but I think it's Hassan Hashafi, gave a statement before the game offering condolences to the victims of the protest. And he said, "We are with them and sympathize with them. We are here, but it does not mean that we should not be their voice or we must not respect them. Whatever we have is from them. We have to fight. We have to perform the best we can and score goals and present the brave people of Iran with the results. And I hope that the conditions change to the expectations of the people."
Yeah, so maybe for listeners, can you just remind us how this all got started, these protests?
Yes. So these protests have been raging for about 2 months in the country, and they started because the country has what's called the morality police. And these are literally people that stand in the streets and go around and shake down mostly women
That's so
for not following.
Dystopian. Morality police.
Yes. And, of course, they're kind of under Sharia law there, basically. And so women have to be covered and they have to wear a hijab. And they not only have to wear a hijab, but have to do it exactly right. And so they arrested this young woman 2 months ago for allegedly not wearing her hijab correctly. Her brother was with her, tried to defend her. It was no good. They took her into custody. And shortly thereafter, she ended up dead. And basically her family says, they murdered her. Her skull was beaten. Her body was badly beaten. They tried to say, the government and the police tried to say, oh, she died from an underlying cause. Like, no, they murdered her. And apparently this is not an outlier. These things have been happening in the country, and people just, finally had enough and started rising up. And so a women-led protest movement first broke out where women were taking off their hijab and going into the street and saying, absolutely not, no more. And it caught fire. And they've now been joined by men, and they're joined by all age demographics. But the dominant force leading the protests, as you often see in these kinds of revolutions, is the young people. The youth of the country are really coming out in force. And I want to be very clear that what's happening in response to these protests is tragic and horrific, and it's very difficult to watch it go down. They are literally murdering people. They are disappearing people. They are giving them the death penalty for protesting. They're sentencing them to very long, harsh sentences, which, our jails are nothing to joke about, but there's, it's certain torture if you're held in their prisons and jails. And it's, these people are protesting and fighting back at great personal cost and risk to themselves, which is why I think I was so moved by the Iranian men and their stance, because they have to worry about their families back home who could be retaliated against for that. They have to worry about their own safety. There have been some other celebrities and sports figures who have sort of like nodded towards the protests and shown support, but this was the most like visible, dominant sign of that. And it was on such a world stage that obviously it's going to be very embarrassing to the Iranian government. So, I don't know what will happen. I'm praying for their safety, but you can't underestimate what that show of support meant.
Yeah, I really loved it because in a time of so much virtue signaling, they demonstrated actual virtue with this because they are actually sacrificing something to make a statement. They're putting their families or themselves at jeopardy. I hope they might well be fine, but it's like they're actually doing something brave and bold and risking something to stand up for what's right. Whereas, to give you an alternative example, the England team was planning on having the captain wear a rainbow armband. However, they were told to stand up for LGBT rights, which are viciously oppressed in the host nation, Qatar or Qatar. The pronunciations vary. And they were told that if that's not allowed, and if the captains do, they will receive a yellow card, which would be not great. A yellow card is a warning, and if you get another yellow card over the course of the game, you're then red carded, and your team has to play down a man. So it would be, especially considering, and this maybe is a little too soccery for people, but the The England captain is, I believe, Harry Kane, their forward. So if he got a yellow card for making this protest, it wouldn't be too difficult for him to play a whole game on a yellow card. A defender, it would be very hard to play with a yellow card because if you make one bad foul, you'd be out. But for an offensive player, he probably could have done it, but it was like a modest sacrifice to their competition. Like pretty minor that they would have had to endure. And they're like, okay, guess we can't do it then. And so they didn't do it. Meanwhile, these Iranian players are literally out here risking it all to stand up for freedom. That to me is virtue, not virtue. I do constantly chastise people for virtue signaling, but in this case, they're virtue signaling in the good sense. It's not virtue signaling because virtue signaling suggests an emptiness or like a lack of actual action or meaning. They're actually just demonstrating bravery and virtue, and good for them. Bravo, but I do hope it doesn't end up with some dark results for them or their families.
Yeah, I'm definitely cheering on the Iranian men's soccer team now, and I'll be watching the World Cup as I figure out how to. And I don't know, but I do want to bring up one more point here, which is that in response to what's happening in Iran, I have seen many of the usual figures suggesting that the U.S. should be doing more. And it's hard for me because I get very emotional watching these things go down. Like, my heart really breaks for these people. I am so moved by injustice, and so I have such an urge in me to fight it that, like, it is very hard to watch this happening in a country and not want to do something. But my principles and my my knowledge of history both suggest that we absolutely should not get involved in any shape, form, or fashion as a government, as a country, and that in doing so, I'm not hopeful that you would see any better results, right? We've often removed brutal dictators only to have even worse forces spring up in countries. And I think, honestly, what it takes to overturn oppression and injustice long term is the people actually rising up and securing it for themselves. I've seen no proof that any other mechanism of getting to that end goal is actually sustainable, because when the people don't rise up and fight for it and secure it themselves, they cannot sustain it after we leave, right? Which is what you've seen in Afghanistan. And so it's hard to watch, but I do not agree that we should get involved. I'm curious about your thoughts on that. But I will say I do think for people, especially people who might become political targets, especially, I would hope to see a very open refugee process in the U.S. for them to get out of there.
Yeah, I think it depends what we mean by get involved, because in terms of military, regime change, well, most of the nations that we've done that in end up far worse than they were to begin with. And also the U.S. has a habit of installing new regimes that are as bad or worse than the old regimes. I think that would be a disaster, and also ultimately American policy should serve America's interests, not the world. We can't police the world. But I do think that we should open our doors to refugees from Iran. I think we can speak boldly on the side of freedom. We can laud the protesters. I even actually do believe, I think broad-based economic sanctions are bad. They hurt the citizens and the economy. But I think like sanctioning individual members of the Iranian regime and the government, freezing their U.S. assets, specific sanctions targeting individuals who've committed atrocities can be appropriate. And I don't think they have the same consequences as would, just sanctioning all Iranian goods, because that would ultimately starve the people,
right?
Which is not helping anything. But yeah, I've always thought with the Russian oligarchs, if we freeze their U.S. assets, some of these individuals, I'm not going to cry any tears for them. They pal around with Putin. They deserve it. Why not? So I think there's some things we can do, but I definitely agree that and it's funny, there's some Iranian American friends in the liberty movement who I think they would support some intervention on this one because, and I get it. It's their people. It's their home. But I still, no, I think it would work out worse even for the Iranian people, especially because in that region of the world, there's so much anti-American sentiment that whatever regime you ended up propping up would be really unstable because it would be viewed as America's puppet regime. And I don't know. That's a whole debate, but I'm certainly not somebody who thinks we need to go down that path.
Yeah, I've seen that urge in a few different instances within the kind of liberty movement. Like people who came from Cuba or their families are from Cuba would often support a little bit more intervention there. And like, I get it because, I'm not Iranian, but I feel compelled to I'm like, what can I do? Can I house a woman in my house? Like, what can I do? And you just feel helpless. And that's the problem, that a lot of times when people feel they see evil in the world, they feel helpless, they turn to government. And I get the instinct, I get the urge, but it never goes well. It never ends up solving the problem. It just creates 10 more. So unfortunately, I think we have to find ways to donate. I like some of the suggestions you laid out here as far as, seizing assets or freezing their accounts. But sanctions are not a good idea, and we definitely don't need to be getting militarily involved at all. So while the Iranian government has still been on Twitter this entire time, while it is literally killing children in the streets, the one person who has not been on Twitter when it comes to the world leadership stage is Donald Trump, but that changed over the past week, and I'm having a great time, Brad. I cannot lie. I can't pretend that I'm not loving Twitter right now. It's so fun.
It's chaotic, but it is fun.
Yeah. Yeah, so Elon, we've said this all along. We love Elon. He has major chaos energy. I think it's so fun to watch go down, but he basically ended up putting up a poll on Twitter that said reinstate former President Trump. And it garnered over 15 million votes. It was a pretty close vote, actually. 51.8% of people voted yes to 48.2% of people who voted no. In response to the poll, he then tweeted Vox Populi, Vox Dei, which is a Latin phrase, which basically means the people's vote will reign. And then he said 134 million people have seen this poll. So there was a lot of engagement on it. But in response, there was the usual weeping and gnashing of teeth. Sadiq Khan, who's the new mayor of London, he said, this is just bleak to me that this guy's in charge of London, but he says, Trump is a dangerous far-right politician who has a history of inciting violence. He must not be allowed to use social media to preach hate and further fuel the politics of division. The return of Donald Trump to Twitter shows why we desperately need regulation of social media and online speech. Freedom of speech is vital, but it must be balanced against keeping other people safe to protect our democracy and society.
Bruh.
Oh my gosh. Bruh, take a breath. And honestly, maybe go worry about, the car bombs in your own city. I'm sorry. Get out of here. I cannot with him. No. Also, the mainstream media is losing their minds over this. They hate that Twitter is competition to them, and Trump coming back will probably mean a lot more people are paying attention to Twitter. But CBS on Face the Nation had a guest that actually claimed Russian intelligence was manipulating Elon Musk's poll to help get Trump reinstated on Twitter. Let's roll that clip.
So I think these polls are mostly a gimmick, and I would argue the people haven't spoken. The GRU has spoken. Twitter
Russian
has become,
intelligence, you mean?
100%. Twitter has become a playground for bad actors and fake bots. This poll is meaningless. This decision is meaningless.
But you had predicted earlier that Twitter could collapse.
And I love Michael Tracy in response to this. He said, if you're wondering what the evidence is of this, it's not that kind of show, which Jack Hunter also covered for us at Paste.
Yeah, that was particularly nuts because I think there's a word for that. Disinformation, misinformation. We've heard a lot about that lately, but I don't know. And then we also had media companies like CBS News said they'll be pausing their Twitter activity until they see what happens. And then days later, they're like, actually, okay, we're going to use Twitter again because we want clicks and views on our content. But you have all these people, and we just picked a few examples. The reaction to Trump coming back on Twitter is just unhinged. They're so mad about it. They're so freaking out. And I'm like, dude, Twitter allows spokespeople for ISIS. It allows the Iranian regime to tweet death to Israel. All just the absolute state of so many things that are allowed on Twitter. Trump, everyone knows I'm not a fan, right? But I've always thought that him being permanently banned from Twitter was completely nonsensical in the context of who's allowed on Twitter. If he has specific tweets that violate the TOS, maybe they should take them down. Or maybe even during Jan 6, when that was all going down, they should have given him a 48-hour suspension or so. You could argue these kinds of things. But the idea of a permanent ban for life from social media for him, yet ISIS is fine, has never made any sense. So good for Elon, though. Right. I do think it's kind of sus that he did it via a poll.
Yeah. Well, his content moderation standards that he's bringing to Twitter don't seem super consistent. Like, they're arguably definitely more in the spirit of free speech than his predecessors, but they're a little arbitrary and random. But, I've said this all along. Content moderation is free speech, too. He has the right to do whatever the heck he wants on his platform. I'm inclined to agree with something you said on Twitter, which is, like, I think that there should be a really high standard for just permanently deleting somebody. That doesn't seem to really be necessary the vast majority of the time. And I think especially when you're talking about world leaders, like it's kind of important that the people can hear what they're saying and judge it and evaluate it. So I don't know. It's a fine line. It's not a job I envy, if I'm being honest, but I do think as a whole he's doing better than most. And I think it's really funny that there is all of this like freaking out over Trump being back on Twitter when Trump is kind of like, he's back on Twitter, his account's there, but he's not actually back on Twitter. He hasn't tweeted since being reinstated. And in interviews, he's actually said he sees no reason, quote, quote, for returning to Twitter. He said, I don't see any reason. They have a lot of problems at Twitter. You see what's going on. It may make it, it may not make it, he said. And then he also suggested that his social media platform he launched, True Social, is a far superior platform. And he said to his followers there, don't worry, we aren't going anywhere. True Social is special. So I don't even understand where this like freaking out is coming from.
I'm sorry, though. I don't believe that he'll be able to resist. Elon tweeted this very childish meme of it was like Trump staring at a busty woman's chest and the Twitter symbol was the woman's face. And it's like trying to resist. And I'm like, that's very juvenile. He needs to get a grip. But
he wants him back.
I don't think Trump will be able to resist. He has over 80 million followers. I think maybe now over 100. It's been blowing up on his... Twitter gave him access to an audience that is not on Truth Social. He'd be lucky to reach a few million people on there. And I do not think he will be able to resist. I could be wrong, but I think he will tweet again and he will be back on there. I don't think he'll be able to. It's Donald Trump. How much impulse and self-control do we think he has? I don't think any. So I think he will be tweeting back. Let's see how long this lasts. All right, everybody, it's time to talk about some of the stories that have been blowing up on the internet this week in our very online segment. I found this one pretty interesting. There's a radio host, Charlamagne Tha God, who is hugely influential in the African-American community and the music industry. And he recently sat down for an interview with Fox News Digital. And he's been kind of a dissident voice in our politics. He's the one who got Joe Biden to say in that interview, "You ain't black if you don't vote for me," which was quite the moment. But Charlamagne had some interesting insights about the state of America's political culture. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Sorry to tell y'all, man, I'm from the South. I'm from South Carolina. More of the country is more like Florida than, we may want to believe. But majority of America is more, rural and, full of conservative values, like in a place like Florida than there is other places. I think when you live in New York or, California, you might be fooled and think that's the world, but that's not the world. The world is more sovereign in Midwest than anything.
So, Hannah, what did you think of this? I thought that was pretty insightful.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely accurate. And, as somebody who's traveled the country really extensively, I used to pretty much live on the road domestically for a lot of my work. I've been to a lot of these places that are supposedly so blue. And I know it's anecdotal, but I often end up talking about politics, like my Uber driver, my bartender, my waitress, because, you're sitting in a bar by yourself, they make conversation, you're driving, they ask you what you do. I work in politics. It's kind of inevitable the conversation turns to politics. And what has always fascinated me is I've never met these hardline progressives that they claim are out there, even in places like San Francisco, even in places like New York City. It's often a lot more nuanced and a lot more sort of libertarian, and they fall on the left because they can't stand the right. Like, they're definitely like solid blue, but like they'll open up and say, yeah, I wish there were more choices. I don't like this about Democrats. I hate, and usually it's the economic side, right? They can't stand what they're doing to money. They can't stand that the cost of living is going up. It's hard to get housing, and they do to some extent understand that those are due to those policies. So I find this to be completely accurate, and I think that the media is really the main reason that we're convinced that you have like this large segment of the population that's hardline over here. And it's because they are, right? Those are the people, the activists in the media, who are actually of that cut. And it's just absolutely false that this is something that you find predominantly throughout most parts. And you know, even if you do find it, especially if you go into like rural New York or you go into like, you know, Southern California, it's even less the case. And actually here in Atlanta, you know, very blue. And I won't say who to protect their privacy, but I had a service provider I was working with yesterday who's in a left-leaning field, very artsy field, and they were telling me, like, you know, being a business owner makes me really hate the Democrats. Like, I don't want to support Republicans. They're like, I don't want to support Republicans. I can't stand some of the individual liberty, you know, stuff they do. And they're like, but at the end of the day, like, you can't deny the economy was better under Trump. And, like, I just wish there were more options. And, like, you know, you can't even say that out loud, she said to me, in my industry, but that's the truth. I think a lot of people quietly feel like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think it's really nice to see somebody, I believe Charlamagne lives in New York, but to see somebody in media in these bubbles aware that they're in a bubble, right? Because most of the country is not like New York City, and even New York City is not as monolithic as you'd think. But even most of the country is so not like that. And I grew up in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, so kind of New England. And I remember, you know, when I went to college and I started to meet people from across the country, I kind of did think that things were more or less similar to how they were where I grew up. And now, you know, moving to West Michigan, it's a very different culture. But now I've been all over the country. I've been across the world. I just have a very different sense of things. And I think there's a humility that brings. And there's but when you do think that your views and your values are extremely widespread, it's easier to demonize the people who don't think like you and think of them as some abstract other. But yeah, I do think most of America is more like Florida, because Florida is not hard red either. That's the thing. It was a swing district until very recently, but it's definitely light red. And it's got tons of diversity of all kinds within its borders, political, socioeconomic, racial. And so, yeah, I think America is more like Florida. And I think it's interesting. I like Charlamagne. I mean, I'm sure he says and believes all sorts of things I disagree with, but he's kind of an independent voice in what is often in progressive entertainment media, not especially black media, but in that whole genre of entertainment media, a hard left echo chamber. And he is not that. He's capable of introspection, and I appreciate that. I don't know. I thought that was a cool moment.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought it was really cool. And I think you're right about Florida. People forget it's painted as hardline right. But even DeSantis, who I think is pretty far right, he's definitely further right of me, but he did some strategic things to get to where he is in the past couple of years. Like, he didn't really take a hardline stance on abortion. You know, he didn't really say anything more than, I think, like a 15-week ban. Like, he picks his culture war battles carefully for that state, is what I would say. And I think that that's what you have to do in those kinds of areas. But yeah, Florida's still pretty purple in a lot of places. And I think that, you know, as a whole, that's kind of good news for people who care about the economy more than anything. Because I think a lot of people will put up with a lot of stuff to have like a solid 401k, to have a solid bank account, to not have to worry about feeding their families, right? A lot of things go out the window when those are concerned. So, and I saw something point this out. I don't want to go super deep into this, but I thought this was important. I actually saw this on TikTok. But when we're talking about economic concerns, you know, looking at what happened over the past month, when there was kind of a surprise that Democrats have prevailed as they have, given how unpopular some of their policies have been and how everybody thought the economy was the top issue, this woman said, for a lot of women, abortion is an economics issue. And I don't like that fact, to be clear. I'm not pro-abortion. I think we should be doing a lot more to help people keep their babies. But that is true, right? A lot of people, when they think about like being able to afford their life, like women calculate, like, I can't afford to have a kid in that.
That is true.
You don't?
I think I think what makes that not so true is the idea that it's for a lot of women. I'm sure there are some women, but I guess I don't have the numbers in front of me. What percentage of women get an abortion or ever are particularly close to getting an abortion in their life?
So we don't have like solid numbers on this because a lot of healthcare data is private, but the studies I've seen show that 1 in 4 women will have an abortion by the time they're 45 in the U.S. and over 600,000 on average annually have an abortion.
That is a lot. So yeah. But
it's a lot.
I don't know. Something feels wrong to me about describing it as an economic issue. Because I'm
telling you though, I think as a woman, like I don't usually pull this card, but I think it is. Like, I think a lot of women, it's 2 main reasons they get an abortion. One is like societal, people look down on you for being a single mom, right? And if you don't feel like you have like a network that's going to support you in that, just on like an ethical, moral basis, I think you're more inclined to get an abortion. And then the second is economics. I firmly believe the vast majority of women who get abortions do not want them. I think they live to regret them. I think they carry a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and a lot of regret. But I think it is a choice of like, can I go to school and have a baby? Can I get a degree and have a baby? Can I pay my bills and have a baby? And I think if you don't have a partner, or even if you do have a partner, because keep in mind, a lot of women who have abortions have a partner, are married, even have other kids. It's a calculation of, can we afford this other kid? And I think that's a sad reality. Yeah,
I'm certainly can't say that I'm an expert in it, so maybe that's true.
All right, let's move on to a less sad subject. I saw going down on Twitter, Dave Portnoy, who owns Barstool Sports, is having an all-out brawl with the New York Times, and I'm here for it all day long because I really like him, and I really hate the New York Times.
So Dave Portnoy, who is the face of Barstool Sports, he's built this empire out of it. Barstool Sports, for folks that are listening that don't know, is like this entertainment, sports, politics, sort of, but pop culture-y multimedia empire, podcast, YouTube, website, everything. It's huge. And so the New York Times wrote a real hit piece on him. So the New York Times, this is the headline. It's about Dave Portnoy's ostensibly connection to sports betting and advertising and promoting the industry, which kind of makes sense. It's a sports-focused media empire, and they do ads for sports betting. So does the BBC, sports podcasts, and basically everyone these days. This is the headline from the New York Times. Desperate for growth, aging casino company embraced degenerate gambler. This is by reporter Emily Steele. The subheading is David Portnoy, who has a history of misogynistic and racist behavior, is now a public spokesman for the sports betting industry. So I went through and read this article, and it's like a weird focus on who cares if he promotes sports betting. It's a sports media company. That makes sense. And literally everyone is promoting sports betting now. I get ads for it all the time. There's tons of money in it. I don't think that's I probably wouldn't want to promote it, to be honest, because it's gambling and that can be addictive. But whatever. This focus on Dave Portnoy is weird. And then this was such a hit piece because there's this one paragraph, that subheading, racist and misogynistic comments, is substantiated with one single paragraph with 3 examples from his decades-long career. And the one where she claims that he said some women deserve to be raped. I went and looked at the blog post that he cited. He obviously, I'm sure he wouldn't say this again the same today, but it's like from years and years ago, he wrote a joke very clearly, humorously, saying, I never condone rape, but if you look like that good in skinny jeans, you're asking for it, or something. Don't say that, dude, obviously. But to say that he actually believes some women deserve to be raped, based on the basis of that in poor taste joke from however many years ago, where he was clearly not being serious, is a total mischaracterization and hit job. And you're like picking a couple controversial things from a decades-long broadcaster to paste them as a racist and misogynist. And then the most shocking part of this is that she says that she reached out to him for comment and he didn't give her any answers. And he responds and is with the receipts and is like, that's not true.
Wow. I mean, this has been an ongoing campaign in the media, though. They really hate him. And I'm like, who did he make mad? Because there was also, like, earlier this year or last year, I think, there was, like, a Me Too campaign kind of coming for him. And they were, like, revealing that he has, like, some weird sex stuff that he does. But it was all consensual. Like, nobody was alleging that any of it was forced. It's like, okay, if he wants to, like, pee on women in beds or whatever they were accusing him of, I'm just throwing that out. But, like, who cares? Like, why is this a news headline? What people do in the privacy of their bedrooms? And it's the left doing it, trying to police these bedrooms of consensual interactions. And I just don't understand it. I've thought it was a weird kind of campaign against him for some time. Like, I don't love everything on Barstool Sports. Like, of course, some of it's crass and some of it's like, you know, I don't know. I don't think it's like sexist or misogynistic, but is it like edifying to women? No. But like, I mean, I'm just so tired of this like Karen culture. Like, let him live. Let people enjoy this kind of entertainment if that's what they like. Like, this is just absolutely absurd. And to what end, right? Like, there is no actual agenda here other than trying to take him down and make him look bad for whatever reason. You just don't like him, and so you're going to write a hit piece about him. And then you're going to lie about whether or not he actually responded. Like, to me, the New York Times runs around trying to act like they're this stalwart of journalism. They're this, like, pillar of truth and accountability and research and, like, investigative journalism and intellect. And it's like, no, you're not. You're actually as shoddy as, like, TMZ. They lose all credibility when they do this kind of thing. Actually, TMZ is more credible.
He posted this whole receipts of their conversation, including where he essentially says that she was reaching out to 39 women, asking them for dirt on Dave, and all of them were like, nah, I don't really have any, and then told him, and she was asking them very leading questions, clearly pushing a certain agenda, and then also he agreed to do an interview with her, and his only condition was, I just want to record it. And then she backed out and she never interviewed him for the story because she was unwilling to go along with video and audio being recording of it. And I have to say this. First off, as a journalist, I always record my interviews so that if anybody disputes what they said, I can have the receipts. Why is she unwilling? Like, seriously, that is so, as a journalist, incredibly sus that you are unwilling to conduct an interview where there will be a record. Like, why? Are you going to mischaracterize? You know you're going to mischaracterize things or misquote things? Like, that to me was really bad for her. But so we're not going to go through and read all these comments, but like this, and then she just tells him you need to, and he told her that her story has so many factual inaccuracies, it's laughable. And he refused to fact check the piece for her. And they just ran with it and said he didn't give answers. And now it's really, it's just really, yeah. And of course, these losers at the New York Times, and I hate to call them that, but they claim that they gave him an opportunity to speak. And I'm like, yeah, you did, but then you said he couldn't record it. And so he wasn't going to do that and let you misquote him. And then he did send her all sorts of replies and information, very little of which, if any, was included in this story. So, look, I think the New York Times does some really good reporting sometimes, but then there's so many woke activists just doing terrible work that, like, this is supposed to be news. This isn't some opinion columnist, right? Like, and they're just doing these transparent hit jobs. I'm sure, you know what? I don't know everything about Dave Portnoy. There may very well be legitimate reporting critical of him to be done. But this ain't it. This is not it. And this was such a bad look for the Times. But more people need to be combative like this when they know a hit piece is coming on them. And bring the receipts. He posted a video scrolling through the replies, showing the messages for all to see. And they claimed it was selectively edited because there was one message at the end that he didn't include that's from another time period. That's not they're acting like it's a fake video just because he didn't include one message. Like, anyway, bring receipts. And these journalists, like, if I get requested for comment from one of these sources, now I am very hesitant to talk to somebody from some of these places because I have seen them do hit jobs on many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I pretty much have a policy of not responding to the mainstream media, or if I do it through like a spokesperson or like, you know, different like group that I'm working for. If they want to have like their people respond, I'm just like, I don't see the point. I think they're often disingenuous. They do a lot of hit pieces. They misconstrue information. Like, they're just not trustworthy, and this is why they will die and base politics will take over. Anyways, let's go to the mailbag. Guys, it was not a great week for listening comprehension out there, and we've got to call some things out because we often break our segments from the podcast up and put them on YouTube. If you're listening, you might not know that, but people watch on YouTube and online as well. And we put our segment up about what we talked about last week, which was the FBI having informants that were inside January 6th. And we shared that clip. And it got weird really fast. It was immediately flagged by the like MAGA cult worshippers, the Groypers, that whole little like, you know, actual alt-right tribe. Immediately took note of it because this is like their top issue, right? January 6th and like proving that the FBI did it. And basically this woman named Julie Kelly responds. She writes for something called The American Greatness, which is a very far right, like cringy publication as best I can tell. I'm not that familiar with them, but she responds to the video and she says, So Brad, believing the FBI played a major role in January 6th is a Q ultra MAGA conspiracy. I'm here to challenge you on the accusation. Care to discuss? So I sent it to you and I'm like, this lady, what? And this is one of like 10 things she posted. She was going ham on this clip, like losing her mind. And I'm like, he literally says it's not a conspiracy at the top of the clip. Like, what?
My whole point was that it sounds like something that should be a conspiracy, but isn't. And she is like, so you're saying this is a conspiracy? No. I mean, I wondered if she'd actually watched the video or not, or if she was just responding to something and someone had sent it. But I was like, this is really bad faith or very ignorant. And of course, then the MAGA or Groyper bots are all flooding the replies with angry hate. And it's like, did any of them watch this video? Because of all our content, this seems like not the video to piss them off. Like, we do a lot more stuff they wouldn't like than this. Like, I guess they're saying we're late to the party. And I'm like, that's because we don't obsessively cover January 6th all the time. Like, okay, we cover a wide breadth of things and we wait for kind of investigations and facts to develop. We don't get out in front of things and then maybe they never come true. We kind of wait, and that's how you should do things.
Also, what a lot of them were mad about was that we said in the clip we don't know whether or not, to what extent the FBI was involved in actually, like, making January 6th happen, that, like, questions should be asked. But they're like, how dare you still be asking it? It's so obvious the FBI did all this. And, like, they just are conspiracy theorists, and they're so mad that we're talking about this, but still not going all the way over into their tinfoil hat land. And,
we were saying the FBI had informants. Why didn't they stop this? They knew this was going on. But we're not saying the whole thing was a hoax perpetrated by the FBI, because there's not facts to support that. So at all. Like, anyway, whatever. Julie
thanks
Karen.
But I will say, Julie, thanks for the clicks, because it really drove a lot of traffic.
So we got some more comments on our podcast that said, FTX, in my opinion, this is referring to the big crypto scandal we covered, is the poster boy for criminals wanting to control the innocent. Another person said, there isn't a scandal. There is just a lot of dumb Americans who believed celebrities that crypto was real investing. As much as we taught them the lessons of tulips and beanie babies, they kept telling us, no, this is different. You are just too old to understand it. The collapse of FTX and NFTs and crypto was about the most predictable thing ever. Sorry, this dude, you don't know what you're talking about if you conflate crypto and FTX with NFTs, which are literally like just not a thing. And also, when you lump all cryptocurrency together, you're just telling on yourself for being misinformed. Bitcoin is extremely different as an investment proposition than Dogecoin, a literal meme currency. And FTX has collapsed because they committed illegal, fraudulent crimes. And then other cryptocurrency exchanges, to say nothing of the many cryptocurrency and Bitcoin that's held not through exchanges, haven't collapsed because they didn't. So this is an oversimplification. I know that like people who don't like crypto look at this and are like, oh, this proves us all right about everything. It doesn't. It complicates things, sure. But I think anyone who thinks one story proves they were right all along about everything and their sweeping pronouncements is probably reading in too much to things.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I also do have one question about his comment. Now, I know what he means when he says Beanie Babies, because I, as a child, very much bought into the Beanie Baby bubble, and I lost everything when it burst. So I get that comparison.
You lost everything? What? Like some allowance money?
No. Oh, no, Brad. I was working under the table at 10 years old for a store that sold Beanie Babies and getting paid in Beanie Babies, and I also was investing my allowance in Beanie Babies because I had a magazine that showed you what they were going to be worth down the road, and I was forcing my siblings to invest. Like, I was building my family's future on Beanie Babies. I was confident I was going to make us a millionaire, and then they ended up being worth less than nothing. But what's he talking about when he says tulip? That's what I didn't understand.
Maybe that was before us, a similar thing. I have no idea. Okay, I really don't know.
I didn't know either. All right. Well, another commenter said, I hate to even think like this, but I have to wonder if Ann Coulter hired those kids to generate buzz for her. Which, maybe. Honestly, it's the best thing that's happened for her in a minute.
They couldn't have done more to help her if they were paid. I will say that.
I love that. Somebody else said, Biscoff Delta Airlines cookies are amazing. I buy those on purpose from the store. Psychopath.
Gross. Those are not cookies. That's cardboard. That's cardboard graham cracker strips, and you're calling them cookies, which is fraud, and they should be prosecuted and locked up for that. And the fact that you would buy those from the store, maybe capitalism was a mistake. Maybe people don't need choices. Too many choices if we're out here doing this.
That's a hot take if I've ever heard one.
So capitalism, this is another person said, if free speech means anything, it means my right to say what you don't want to hear. George Orwell. That is actually a slight misquote, but or just a paraphrase of his real quote. But yes, I agree with the sentiment. Somebody else said, you two nailed it. Thank you on the Ann Coulter part. I appreciate that. Another dude said, she is not anti-immigrant. She is anti-illegal immigration. Sorry, that's just not true. Yeah. Ann Coulter wants to heavily limit, if not outright end legal immigration. She is opposed to legal immigration. That
also, I just want to say, anybody who claims to only be opposed to illegal immigration and have no problem with immigration as a whole is full of it, unless they're actively working to get rid of our ridiculously strict immigration system we currently have in place. Sorry, no, that's such a cop-out. I hate it.
Yeah, I get it. Like, I also want us to have legal immigration and not illegal, but you can't say that when it's mostly impossible for people to legally immigrate in lots of situations. Of course, I mean, yeah, I think that's not a great point, but oh well.
Oh well. Another person said, but have no fear, we just reelected the same two parties back in power. I can't change what politicians do, but I did change how I voted. Both parties have increased our national debt, now at $31.3 trillion and growing for the last 72 years straight, according to the U.S. Treasury. And yeah, I mean, this is a passion project of mine. I don't think anything gets better until you break the two-party system.
So one more person said, the New York Times is fake news. And that's funny they said that about last week's podcast and then this week's podcast. Yeah, I don't think it's fake news, to be clear. I think some of the reporting they do is very good and very serious, but that it is a deeply flawed institution and that there are lots of people in there who are doing activism, factually challenged activism masquerading as objective journalism. But that doesn't mean everything they do is useless.
Mm-hmm. All right, I guess it's time for hot takes with that being said. I went to the store the other day, and I can't explain what came over me, but I had a straight-up Alabama shopping trip. Like, something deep within me reemerged. I bought bologna. I bought canned corned beef hash. I bought ramen noodles. The list goes on. And I received some pushback for that within my house, specifically on the bologna front. And I just want to say, like, I think bologna is actually great. It's amazing on a mayonnaise sandwich. It's excellent if you fry it. Fried bologna is one of the best things in the world. And I think it's all that bologna just needs better marketing, because people eat lots of weird things, like snails. Snails are marketed as high-end, and they're gross, and they're snails. But, like, bologna gets a bad rap. I just think it needs better PR, better marketing. And I think
fried bologna with mayonnaise. I wonder why Alabama has an obesity problem.
Honest to God, I don't know how me and my siblings are not incredibly obese. Like, the way we eat is... I mean, I eat well now as an adult, but, like, growing up, it was straight sugar, straight processed foods. Like, we chowed down.
So funny that we were talking about weight, because my hot take comes from this viral TikTok trend that the New York Post covered about a woman who is a personal trainer, and in terms of exercise, she charges $150 an hour, and she weighs 250 pounds and is not particularly fit, and that's her whole thing. She is a plus-sized personal trainer. And I have to say, like, no shade to her. I really don't believe in shaming overweight people who work out. I think it's great. They should be encouraged. But I would not pay somebody to give me fitness advice who is not fit. And she says, well, what matters is your knowledge and your expertise, not your actual... And sure, but there's a bit of a practice what you preach problem here for me, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not gonna, in general, take lessons from somebody who hasn't shown they can do the thing they're trying to teach me.
I agree. And also, as somebody who works out regularly, like, what motivation do you have except for that your fitness instructor is so much hotter than you and you're competing with them? Like, that gets me going in class. Like, if my yoga instructor is, like, super toned and fit, I'm like, oh, all right, I got to work really hard. Like, now I got to compete. And that's a good motivating factor. So I think you missed that in this scenario. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Once again, have a happy Thanksgiving. We'll see you next week. And until then, stay based.